Welcome to Tales from Flat Space, a podcast of science fiction and fantasy by yours truly, Gina A. Pond. Just know that the stories in this podcast may contain content that could be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. So this is Survey, Part 3, Mission, Chapter 45, Marcia. "I'll say one thing for Mr. Olka, he's very thorough," said Kyler, as we spent yet another night analyzing his reams of evidence. I nodded. Well, he said he'd been working with them for 30 years, and he keeps track of everything that happens at Unity Hub. These files are just the tip of the iceberg. He has years of video footage, too. I'm not really looking forward to that. I'm not looking forward to it either, they said, their voice flat. There was a pained look behind their eyes, and they seemed far away from Unity Hub. I reached across the table and took their hand. They jumped. "You don't have to watch the video," I said. They shook their head. "I need to watch it, Marcia. You won't know what to look for." "Okay, but if it becomes too much, you stop, okay? Besides, I don't think we need to watch 30 years' worth to confirm that it's the New Harmonists." "No, you definitely won't," said Lulu from the door of my office. Kyra and I both jumped this time, and I looked up to see Lulu standing rigid in the doorway in a short leather dress and her ornate locked necklace. But her face was an icy mask. She closed the door and stood still in front of the table, shaking. She tore off the necklace and threw it at the wall. "Lulu?" I asked quietly. She said in a deadly whisper, "I will kill them all. If they escape Unity Hub, I will hunt them down until the day I die." Kyler and I looked at each other. Neither of us had ever seen Lulu angry. "What's wrong, Lulu?" I asked. "They're fucking monsters," she said, louder. "They should all be strung up by their balls. And Olka just stood there like a fucking statue while they broke his rules. I can't believe him." Kyler stood and carefully led Lulu to a seat at the table. "What did you see, Lulu?" they asked. "I went to one of the auctions a couple of weeks ago, and that was bad enough, especially since I know what they do to their slaves. But now I know what they do with the blondes," she said. "They were having this weird ritual where they were quoting from the Bible and some other book, and there was this dais, and they brought in the blonde, and they hung her in front of the 4 priests on a dais." Kyler interrupted, who had blanched paper white and slowly sat back down. Their eyes widened, pupils dilated, looking past us to some other time and place. Then they started the ritual. The initiates were called into the room in a group. Then the offering was prepared for them. The offering was taken down and put on an altar, rubbed with an oil that had hallucinogens and aphrodisiacs, so she didn't scream or cry, except in false ecstasy. Then, after they do whatever religious things they do, the initiates rape her one by one, spending their seed in the hope to get her pregnant. If she does get pregnant and it's a boy, she never sees the child. If it's a girl... Tears fell slowly down Kyler's face. Lulu nodded, wild-eyed, staring at Kyler. I knew they had been an offering, but Kyler had never gone into detail about what happened to them, except to say that it was bad. Even hearing about it secondhand was more horrifying than I had imagined. And to do it in the name of God? Any compassion I may have harbored as a priest was gone, and a cold anger took its place. Looking at Lulu's face, I could see that Kyler hadn't told her about their past either. Lulu opened her mouth and shut it. She looked at me, then back at Kyler. I could feel Lulu's rage coming off her in waves, and it almost overwhelmed me. She stood up. "Give me the list," she said in a cold voice, not looking quite sane. "No," I said, even though part of me wanted to. "Marcia, give me the list," she commanded. I stood and looked her in the eye. "Lulu, don't make me pull rank on you. If you go after them now, we will lose. You know it's not much longer before we take them down, but you have to trust me to get us there. We will take them out. All of them, I promise. I stared her down for a moment, then added, Don't let Jenny and Mark's work be in vain. Lulu stared at me, her face an expressionless mask I couldn't read. I prayed that she would see I was right. She wanted vengeance, and I totally understood that. But I hoped the spy would see strategic sense at least. It was a full minute before she nodded in agreement. They will be executed, all of them. I nodded and let out a breath. Jessica? Kyler said weakly. Lulu blinked, and Kyler's pained voice seemed to snap her out of icy anger. She knelt down beside them. Lulu took Kyler's face in her hands. You're from that horrible place? They did this to you? They nodded. It was a long time ago. Lulu shook her head. No, honey, it's never a long time ago. Not for something like that. She took Kyler into her arms, and Kyler began to sob. Lulu lifted Kyler from the chair and carried them to one of the couches on the other side of the room, whispering into their ear. I followed and sat across from the pair, rubbing my hands through my hair, and then put my head in my hands and just waited. When Kyler's sobs finally subsided, I said, Look, it's late. Take Kyler home and put them to bed. Don't leave them alone. Both of you take the morning off tomorrow, and even the whole day. Ebo and Jack are perfectly capable of running the office. Besides, I have Senate sessions all day tomorrow. Kyler nodded into Lulu's shoulder. Lulu said, Thanks, Marcia. He gave a weak smile. Jessica? I asked the other woman. You didn't think Lulu was my real name, did you? She said. I chuckled. Well, I shrugged. Lulu smiled, but it barely touched her eyes. She gently helped Kyler to stand, and they left the room. The days of long Senate sessions and the nights cataloging Olka's data began to blur together. Cataloging what the new Harmonists did was bad enough, but the Senate sessions were becoming harder too. I now knew more about the more prominent senators I had to work with than I ever really wanted to know. I knew many of them disappeared for weeks at a time after Unity Senate sessions, presumably to check in on their jurisdictions. Olka had evidence that it was to check in on their holdings in the outer colonies. The interesting pattern that I found between Olka's evidence and news from the outer colonies was that there seemed to be terrorist groups emerging from the outer colonies. It was hard to pinpoint their exact grievances, as they ranged from unity taxes to secessionist movements to religious movements, but what they did have in common was that they were all well-funded. Sun Tzu had infiltrated a few of these groups and traced most, though not all, of their funding back to Unity Hub. Sun Tzu's agents didn't know if there was one source or multiple sources, but a good percentage of the money had come from here. Given how many loyal sons were in the Senate, and how many of them were quite wealthy, there was no telling who it could be. I watched them all carefully during Senate sessions, and those making the most noise were the most prominent on the list that Olka had given me. But even Olka didn't have a complete list of loyal sons and their supporters. There had been many more recruited over the years who Olka felt weren't worth his time to keep an eye on, like Adelson and the man from Jack's Scaper. It made walking through the station halls an exercise in hypervigilance, which was hard to keep up from day to day. I was grateful to Oscar for sticking to me like glue, and he was becoming a permanent fixture in my Senate box. It also didn't hurt that he was huge, and even if Fleet Security thought his sword was ornamental, a rumor which Oscar himself encouraged, I knew it wasn't. That was surprisingly comforting. Less comforting was Hades reminding us to wait before we confronted the Senate, since we needed to know if Jenny and Mark were successful. We all understood that the AIs were playing the long game, but the tension was high. Knowing what was still happening while we had to wait and sift through data for proof just stoked our anger, making us more determined to take them down. Eventually, Lulu returned to Olka. Considering her mood the day after she came back from seeing him for the first time since the offering ritual, I guess they made up and renegotiated some aspects of her contract. Playing diplomat was getting harder and harder. I was ready for this mission to end. You got a meeting with Olka? How the hell did you manage that? Asked Malcolm a month later as we talked in my apartment. My intern is quite resourceful and an equal opportunity party girl, I said. My intuition and Olka's warning was stopping me from sharing as much with Mal as I thought I should. Something was wrong and it worried me. What's going on, Mal? Where have you been the last few months? He fidgeted with his glass and didn't look at me. I took a drink of my own water and waited. Did anything more come from those emails? He asked. I frowned. Jack and I told you a while ago that we couldn't decipher the messages without the key. The AIs confirm this, and while they can do a lot of things us mere mortals can't, there are still some limits. The only way we'll get the key is to pry it off one of the new harmonists. And they aren't stupid, Mal. We kill any of them before we can put the whole case before the Senate, and they'll know we're after them and entrench. Mal stood up and paced around my lounge. He was quiet again, but the anger coming off him was palpable. They're recruiting new loyal sons within the government, including in UI, he said. He took a breath, and then sat down again. A few months before you got here, Miller started getting buddy-buddy with my partner. Adrian was ambitious, and when I tried to tell him it was weird, he just brushed it off. When you told me that Miller was possibly a new harmonist, I went to confront Adrian about it, since I knew Miller had invited him to these special meetings only for white guys. I figured that he'd listen to me. I mean, we've been friends for over 15 years. We went through UI training together. Hell, I even introduced him to his fiancée. Mal's hands twisted on his glass. But fucking hell, they got to him. I went to his apartment a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't even consider what I was saying. He kept looking at me like I was some sort of dirt under his shoe. I told him about the new harmonists and how they're slavers and bigots, but he just kept shaking his head. He kept telling me that I was wrong, and that all they wanted to do was bring some much-needed order to unity. I said, what, like slavery? He said it wasn't slavery, but putting people in their proper place. Then I said, oh, so you think I should be wearing a fucking collar and shining your shoes? He just looked at me and said, yes. I lost it. I hit him, and we fought. God, and the things that came out of his mouth that we all thought was ancient history. He actually called me the N-word. Can you frickin' believe it? Mal's eyes were angry, shining with unshed tears. I haven't seen him since. He even moved out of his apartment. Tamara came to see me a week later and said that he had broken up with her because she wasn't a proper woman. That was the last straw. I used all my skills to track him down. I followed him the other night to Olka's and snuck inside. They were doing one of their perverted rituals. You should have seen what they did to this poor girl. It was some sort of initiation for clergy. They gang raped her. Adrian was there and he just watched it like it was all perfectly normal thing to do on a Saturday night. And Miller, that asshole, he was in charge of the whole thing. While Mal was talking, I was thinking hard. This had to have been the same ritual that Lulu had witnessed. Mal, you could have been killed. I was well hidden, since the men on the sidelines wore cloaks with hoods and masks. It was like something out of a fucking movie. He looked over at me. Wait, you knew about this? I nodded. My intern was there. You were lucky she was just as mad and didn't know you were there. If you knew about this, then why haven't you taken them down already, he asked. An eyewitness would be enough for any unity court. Mal, this is bigger than just Miller and your friend, I said. Survey has a plan set up. Survey has a plan, do they? What is it? I stared at him and said nothing. What, now you don't trust me? He said, his voice rising as he stood up again. I stared at him and replied in a cold voice. Mal, you should know better. You've compromised yourself. I would bet that there were some people who knew that someone was there who shouldn't have been. There are a whole lot of new harmonists on Hub, but it's not that large of a group. I would also bet that Adrian already told his new friends all about your argument. If you're caught investigating them, I don't know what they'll do to you. And if they know I'm your sister, they'll come after you just to get at me. They hate Survey even more than they hate Unity. So you're just going to let them rape girls and brainwash men until this magical survey plan happens? I got up from my chair and stood in front of him. I looked him in the eye and said, "You know very well how this game works, Malcolm Xavier Brooks. At least you should. You've been in UI long enough. I can't tell you any more details of my mission, and if I was a compromised agent under your authority, you'd do the same. Let me do what I came here to do and stay out of my way." He stared back at me, angry and wide-eyed. "Fine. You do what you're going to do, and I'll do what I have to do," he said. With that, he turned and left. "Mal," I called after him, but he didn't turn around. "Shame," Papa said. A shiver rolled down my spine. I wanted to go after him, but I couldn't. I went to the kitchenette and removed the alcohol restrictions on the drink dispenser. I stared at it for a minute, then went to bed and tried to sleep. Chapter 46. Jenny. I woke up in a small, cozy room. My blood-spattered dress and shoes had been taken off, and I had been dressed in a plain cotton nightgown. I was on a comfortable bed with soft, warm patchwork quilt on top of me. This was definitely not my cell in the Novus's quarters. Where was I? I blinked a few times, rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, and sat up. It was then that the memories of the church came rushing back. Oh, God, what have I done? I put my head in my hands. But before I could finish thinking about the convent, someone was opening the door. I jumped out of the bed, picked up the nearest thing to hand, and went into a fighting stance. As the door opened all the way, there stood a dark-skinned old woman. Her white hair was braided in small braids, pulled into a ponytail. Unlike a slave, she wore a gray skirt with a white blouse. She wore more jewelry than I had seen on any slave, and none of her necklaces looked anything like a slave collar. She was smiling at me. "What?" I asked. "It's going to be hard to do any damage to me with a pillow, child." I looked down at my hands and realized that I was, indeed, trying to protect myself with a pillow. I threw it back on the bed. "Not necessarily," I said, and the woman laughed. I sat back down on the bed. "Who are you?" I asked. The older woman took a few more steps inside the room and closed the door. "I'm the grandmother." "Kane's grandmother?" She smiled. "Yes, and also, no, I am the grandmother." I must have looked confused because she said, "Don't worry about it right now. May I sit with you? Standing too long isn't good for these old bones." Something about her felt familiar, though I couldn't figure out what. She sat down next to me on the bed, and then took my head in her hands so I was looking her in the eyes. I felt as if she was staring into my soul. You have suffered much in your young life, and this isn't your first time wreaking vengeance. Oh, my dear, I grieved for you at the execution several months ago. Mother's tears. We have much to do in so little time." She gently pulled her hands away. "I'm sorry for that, child, but I needed to know if Kane was right." "Right about what?" She stared at something unseen across the room. "The grandmother, when I was a child, had a vision, and she told it to us. Some people think it was just the whim of an old woman to keep us together, but some of us were there when she spoke, and we believed it. She said that one day a woman from the stars, who has lived as both man and woman, would come to seek... She said that one day a woman from the stars, who has lived as both man and woman, would come to us to seek vengeance and free us all." She looked back at me. I was there when the vision came and heard it for myself. Kane has great hope in his heart and believes this vision with a passion. "And you?" "Me? I believe that the goddess gives us what we need at the right place and the right time." "I'm not a hero out of legend," I said. "No, you're a warrior." I looked at her, opened my mouth for a second, then closed it again. "Yes?" "Yes, that was right. It felt right." I was about to say something more, but she held up her hand. "Right now, we take care of your body since you have been used so badly. Do you want a bath and food?" Suddenly, realizing that I needed to use the toilet and felt grimy and sticky, I nodded. Bath first, by preference. I have to pee. Grandmother laughed. Let's see to that first, then. I'll show you where the bath is, and then I'll go find you some fresh clothes. I'm afraid we burned what you came to us in. It was beyond repair. I grinned. I wasn't fond of that dress anyway. The older woman grinned back. I didn't think you were, child. She stood up, and I followed her out of the room. Bath and necessities taken care of, I followed my nose to the kitchen. There was a large man standing at the stove, stirring a large pot as he muttered to himself. He checked something in the oven and nodded, and then finally noticed I was standing there. Mother Mary and Joseph, make some noise next time, would you? You nearly scared the life out of me. He fanned himself with his kitchen towel and sat down at the large long table near the stove. Although it's good to see you up and about now, Jenny, isn't it? Yes. Sorry I startled you. I was looking for the grandmother and Kane, but ended up here instead. Whatever you're making smells much better than anything I've had in months. Which is true. I was practically drooling and my stomach was trying to wrap around my backbone. Flattery will get you everywhere, my dear. And I made a good solid stew, since I know what kind of crap they serve, or rather, served in that wretched place. Have a seat. The others should be here soon. He stood up and looked at me for a moment, almost as if he was deciding to say something. Then he said, You did a good thing, cleaning out that nest of vipers. Couldn't argue with that, but I wasn't really proud of it either. I took a deep breath. It was necessary. He nodded. I took a seat at the table and watched him do some esoteric things at the stove. Excuse me, but what's your name? The man laughed. Yeah, I'm praising you, and I haven't even properly introduced myself. Name's Byron, and I'm the cook here, among other things, although I think the grandmother would say my main job is gossip. I laughed. Well, everyone needs a hobby. Byron gave a loud belly laugh and nearly dropped the large wooden spoon he was holding. Oh, I like her. Can we keep her? Grandmother stood in the doorway laughing. I'm afraid not, Byron, but she'll be with us for a little while. The older woman came into the kitchen, went to a sideboard, and started pulling out bowls. Help me with this, Jenny, would you? Yes, ma'am, I replied. We set the table for 20 people, while folks slowly started to come into the room. Kane, who was the first to arrive, ran up to me and gave me a big hug. You're awake! Oh, thank the mother! I patted him on the back and reassured him that I was okay. It felt a little awkward after what had happened in the convent, but Kane seemed to be full of hope and joy regardless. I wondered how he managed it. There were several folks I didn't know who were acolytes of the grandmother, local friends, or people passing through. Most of them wore slave collars, although there were some without, including a couple of other white people. There were still a few others yet to arrive, but grandmother declared that they might be a little late, so it was all right to start dinner. Byron took that as his cue and brought the huge pot of stew to the table, along with a large basket of rolls. Kane served grandmother, then me, and then everyone else served themselves. The chatter was pleasant, as if everyone wanted to forget the world outside for a while. I couldn't blame them for trying, but it was hard for me to find any joy in anything. I just stayed quiet and watched them. Byron seemed willing to make up for my lack of conversation, and I even found myself laughing at his few of his well-timed jokes. But halfway through dinner, some new voices were heard out in the hallway. They're here! Shouted Kane, and he ran to open the kitchen door. There was a sound of friendly greetings and the shuffle of feet. A tall man walked in first, who waved to the table. Then I saw the woman behind him. Beth was standing in the doorway. Oh, thank the gods! She exclaimed. I launched myself out of my chair and into Beth's arms. She hugged me back fiercely, and it was as if all the emotion that I had been holding back burst out of me. We both started crying. I couldn't get him out, Jenny, she said into my ear. We tried so hard, but we couldn't find him in time. We couldn't stop it. Oh, God, Jenny, Beth said. I shook my head. You're alive. I didn't get you killed, too, I managed to say through my sobs. When we finally pulled away from each other, I realized everyone else was watching us. I laughed weakly, and so did Beth. The others at the table looked surprised and slightly uncomfortable. Only Grandmother had a serene expression, though there was a hint of smile on her face. Before we sat down, a thought percolated from the back of my brain. "Beth, you still have the box, right?" I asked, looking at her. "How much time is left?" "Yes," she said. "It's in a safe place for now." She looked over at Grandmother, then back at me. "We'll talk about it after dinner, okay?" "Do let Beth have her dinner, Jenny. We have many things to do, but we can't do them without making sure we've sustained ourselves, yes?" said Grandmother. Right, sure. Here." I helped Beth to her seat and served her a bowl of stew. The man with Beth also sat down, and I served him too, since I was standing up anyway. "Thanks," he said. "My name's Thomas, by the way." "Oh, nice to meet you," I said. Byron let out a big belly laugh. "Huh, now I know for sure she's from off-planet. She's a white girl who's actually got manners." I opened my mouth, then shut it, realizing what I had just done. Everyone else laughed, and after a moment I did too. It had been a long time since I was somewhere where I could feel I could laugh. Last time was when I was on station with Jack, Marcia, Mark, and everyone else. Thinking about Mark was still too painful, but thinking about Jack and Marcia made me miss them fiercely. By the time I sat back down, my thoughts were drifting into more sober territory. Beth dug into her food as she hadn't eaten in days. I tried to finish mine, but my mind was reeling with the fact that I could now truly get vengeance with the weapons that Survey had given me. It was too late for me, but if I could free Beth and everyone else, maybe it would give Mark's death meaning. I felt someone watching me and looked up. The Grandmother was staring at me, making me feel as if she were examining my soul again. I held my eyes to hers, and in that moment I felt like I understood why she was called the Grandmother. The woman gave me a small nod, then returned to the conversation around her. After dinner, Beth and I followed the Grandmother into a room that looked like an office and a small library. She motioned us into the room and closed the door. "Please, children, have a seat." There was a seating area with a low table and a few comfortable chairs surrounded by bookshelves. When we were all seated, Grandmother said, "How long?" looking at Beth. "A week." "What? Are you shitting me?" I exclaimed. Beth shook her head. Grandmother held up her hand. "Then we have a lot of work to do. Beth, I need you to get to the maps for the council chambers. Jenny will need as much information as she can get. Get Thomas working on the security details. We'll also need to figure out how to get the comms back, as there's something in the system that's jamming anything going in or out." "Yes, ma'am." The older woman nodded. "Go on, then." Beth looked from me to the other woman with a worried look on her face, but left anyway. The Grandmother turned her attention back to me with that soul-searching look for a third time. After a long moment, I started to get restless. What is she waiting for? There are things to plan so that these assholes could die. We are running out of time. "What?" I finally asked. The Grandmother narrowed her eyes. "Yes, we are running out of time, but you can't go into the council chambers the way you are now. Your raw emotion is making you too dangerous. There will be too much collateral damage if you can't think straight. Or do you want another bloodbath like the convent?" "They all deserved it," I said flatly. "Did they? Did the nuns you killed deserve it? The slaves that got caught in your crossfire? I'll grant you all the priests. The ones that worked there were evil." She paused. "There were slaves killed? By me?" "Yes. Most we were able to help. Some we could not." The old woman looked me in the eye. I knew she was telling the truth. Fuck. I put my head in my hands. "You won't be able to help me. Not in a week." The tears came unbidden, falling to the floor. "There is a way, child, or I would not have brought it up. You need to be thinking clearly to do what you need to do. It won't be easy, and it may not work. It will take great strength of will to get through." I raised my head. "Why me? Huh? I'm no savior. I'm just a white girl from off-planet. I should be your enemy." She paused for a moment, then said, There was a slave rebellion not too long after the original colonists came here and put my ancestors in chains. There's a man who, like one of our ancestors on Earth, talked of peace and revolution. We had demonstrations, and many of us fought for our rights. We fought to avenge the black colonists who were deceived by the white colonists, but the whites had the technology. They rounded up the leaders and forced their spouses and children to kill them, like they forced you to hold the weapon that killed Mark. Any man who showed fighting spirit was killed. Nearly all the men of that generation were killed, really, and many of the women. We were forced to accept slavery or watch our children be forced to kill their parents until no adults were left to pass on anything. We surrendered, but we passed on our history. There is always a grandmother, and we will always make sure my people survive. No, you are not a savior. We don't want or need you to be a messiah. That's not what's being asked of you. We're asking you to take out your ancestors' trash. We're asking you to clean up the mess that Earth did nothing about, and Unity still doesn't want to do anything about. I looked at her, my anger stoked. I was sent by Survey. Yes, but even the AIs know that it has to be one of you. They've laid the foundation. I'm the bullet. Grandmother nodded. I scrubbed my face and my hands and looked the other woman straight in the eye. I'll do it. Whatever it is. Are you sure? Once we begin, we can't stop, and there's no guarantee it will work, she said. It will work. It has to. She raised her eyebrows, then nodded. We'll do the ritual tomorrow night. For now, get some rest. I knew a dismissal when I heard it, so I stood and walked out to the door. I looked back for a moment to see the grandmother praying, reminding me of Marcia. As I watched, a strange double image appeared. It was her, but something more. She looked at me again, and there was something there that hadn't been during our interview. It felt familiar. I nodded, opened the door, and went back to my room. Chapter 47. Jenny. You ready? Asked Beth, as she led me to a door in another part of the structure where the grandmother lived. I learned earlier that it was an underground complex built underneath an abandoned slave hospital that had been burned out during the first slave uprising. Beth had said that the room was left as a reminder of the futility of rebellion. That made sense, but I also thought that it was left to rot to show how little those in charge cared about the welfare of slaves. Regardless, it was still a good place for a base, as there were a lot of local lore about evil spirits roaming the old halls. Byron said they bolster the rumors every so often, so that most people stayed away from it, and anyone from the underground came during the night. The door had some resemblance to hospital doors, but it was painted in symbols, words, and pictures. Some of it I could read, and the wording sounded familiar, but a lot of it I didn't understand. It was beautiful, though, and carefully done. The pattern of bright colors drew my eyes to the shape in the center, which looked like a bright sun or perhaps a golden eye. The air around me felt as if it were waiting for something. I then remembered that Beth had asked me a question, and I answered, yes. She opened the door, and it swung wide onto a large room that held an altar at one end, filled with candles, flowers, and dolls dressed in fancy clothing. There was a statue on the wall of a black woman in chains holding a child, and bowls of fruit and coins under the altar. The statue was surrounded by gold rays and clouds, and the woman and child both had halos around their heads. An altar to the side had a plain white cloth on it, with a pitcher and a tray that was covered in a white cloth. The rest of the room was plain, and there were chairs pushed against the walls. In the middle of the bare wooden floor there was a chair, which Byron was surrounding with a chalk drawing. The drawing looked like a cross between a flower and an angel, with lines and words in it. I stepped into the room, and even though I didn't know what was really going on, it didn't feel strange at all. In fact, I felt welcome here. Byron came over to me after he finished his drawing. Come. He took my hand and led me to the chair in the middle of the room. Don't step on the lines. I sat in the chair and waited while others brought lighters for the candles and lit them. Someone closed the doors, and someone else lit fragrant incense. I began to feel a little lightheaded, but there was also a certain clarity that I couldn't explain. I looked at the statue again. It began to appear more real somehow. I was going to say something, but the words didn't want to come out of my mouth. The grandmother stood in front of me and took my hands in hers. May the spirits guide you to safe harbors. May the spirits soothe the tortured places and give you purpose. May the ancestors rise through you and undo the damage that has been done. She let go of my hands, and Byron handed her a jar. She opened it, handed him the lid, and put her fingers in it, then touched my head. I anoint you with this oil and bless you as you go on this journey. May the Mother guide you and heal you. She gave the jar back to Byron, then walked around the circle to stand behind me, laying her hands on me. The others gathered around me, their feet not touching the lines of the drawing, and laid their hands on me and each other, making sure we were all connected. The grandmother began to pray. Holy Mother, we ask you to help and bless this child so that she may do the work that she has been called to do. May you help her move past her pain and anger to be the sword of justice that will cleanse not only this world, but all that her ancestors have done in the past. God, Goddess, Jesus, Holy Spirit, give her the strength to stand up to our oppressors, and give her the strength of your angel Michael, whose flaming sword dealt your wrath upon the ancient home of earth. Mother, may you give her the insight and awareness to protect the innocent as she metes out your wrath on the archpriest and his minions. The prayer continued, with the others saying prayers, answering hers, and speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The air became thick with words and shouts and singing as time seemed to slow. I had been looking down when the grandmother started, but then something told me to look up. I was fixated on the statue of the dark woman in chains. She filled my vision, and the rest of the world fell away. The prayers of the grandmother seemed to come from another room entirely. The room brightened, and as I watched, the dark woman left her place on the wall and walked towards me. Somehow I was standing now, and the others had disappeared. Since you are new to this, I will tell you my name, she said. I could hear the capitals when she said my name. I waited for her to continue, as it seemed as if her voice was coming from within me, but far away. I am the Black Mother, sometimes called the Black Madonna. You will be my instrument to break the chains that bind me here. It is an enormous task, but you are not without choice, my daughter. Do you accept this, and all that happens after, willingly? I widened my eyes. She called me her daughter. I fell to my knees, tears flowing down my face. She got on her knees and put her hand under my chin. Her face, and the child's, held compassionate, wise, and knowing smiles. I and my siblings have always known who you were, my daughter. The mortal world is not always perfect, but your soul is. I accept your pledge, and remember, you are never alone. Not here and not there. Look. She stepped to the side, and then I could see through the fog into another room that looked like a chapel. In one of the pews sat Marcia and Jack. Marcia was looking right at me. I put a hand out to her as I remembered how she and Jack were kind to me and didn't reject me for who I was or had been. I stretched a hand out again, and now Jack was looking at me while Marcia seemed to be listening elsewhere. The Black Mother smiled. Yes, you remember them. They will come for you when your task is finished. The fog solidified again, and Marcia and Jack were gone. Will I see them again? I asked. Yes. Then I will do this for you. She nodded. I name you my champion and give you this gift so you may do what is necessary. The Black Mother put her hand on my head, and the world exploded in a flash of bright white light. When the light faded, I was floating above my body, which was lying in the drawing on the floor. There were other people in the room with my body, but not as many as before. Their voices were quiet. My breathing was slow, but my body was alive. Will she wake? Someone asked. Grandmother seems to think so, said another voice. I recognized it. Byron. She's strong, said another voice. I recognized that one too. It was Beth. Strong? Me? I never felt strong. I always felt weak, scared all the time. I only did what I thought was necessary. It was all I ever did. You are not weak, my instrument, my sword. Fear is not a weakness. It is a tool. You're in my head now? Am I going crazy? I asked the voice that just spoke to me. Depends on who you ask. Do you feel crazy? The memories of the last months came back to me, and while they still made me angry, they didn't hurt as much as they did. I had a certain detachment from them, as I did the memories of my father. They didn't overwhelm me, even when I thought about Mark's death. It was as if there was a shield between me and the memories. No, I told her. Will this last? No, she said. It would not be healthy for you. You need to grieve, but it will last until you are in a safe place. I gave a mental sigh, but also knew the Black Mother was right. Okay, I thought. With that surrender, my spirit seemed to fill my body in a rush, and I opened my eyes and gasped for air. The noise startled those in the room, and I heard footsteps coming to my side. Byron and Beth's faces appeared above me, and someone else was waving a white fan over my head. How long? I managed to croak out. 2 days, Beth said. Grandmother said you would come out of it, but she didn't know when. I was starting to get worried, though. I didn't doubt, said Byron, but I've known Grandmother and the Black Mother longer than you. Beth smirked at him, but there was good humor in her eyes. She turned back to me. Can you sit up? Yes, I said. They helped me into a sitting position. I was still in the middle of the chalk drawing, but it was now smudged in places. What is this drawing? I asked. It's the sigil of the Black Mother, Byron answered. I nodded. I knew that now. I could feel her touch again, even as Byron spoke the words. He looked at me more closely and whistled. Damn if you aren't touched. How do you feel? I took stock of my body and mind. I feel fine. Ready. We don't have much time left. We need to plan. Do you have the maps ready? Beth widened her eyes. Yes. Yes, we do. Let's go, I said. They helped me to stand up. Other people were looking at me with hope that I hadn't seen earlier. Beth was concerned, but Byron smiled a wide smile. I'll bring you something to eat, he said, and left the room whistling. I smiled, too. I was ready. Vengeance and justice were about to come to New Harmony. Chapter 48. Marcia. The comm signal on my desk lit up. It surprised me, since it was pretty late at night, and even though we were all working late, we usually didn't expect any comms. I pressed the button. Brooks, I said. Oh, good, you're there, said Lulu. You gotta turn on your screen now. I'm sending you a video. The New Harmonist called some sort of last-minute special meeting in the club, and specifically asked Olka not to attend. Naturally, he recorded it. You need to see this now, Marcia. There was anger and urgency in her voice. I didn't hesitate. Right, put it through. The wall screen next to my desk lit up, showing a black and white scene with men in cloaks and milling around. I pushed the button on my desk, and Kyler came in. Yes, Marcia? Call in Ebo and Jack, and you come in too. We're getting a recording of some last-minute ritual. It's not like them to do something last minute. Kyler's eyes widened. Definitely not. Give me a sec. I nodded, and stared at the screen. The lighting wasn't all that great, but I could see a dais at one end of the room. There's a man tied to a chair at the foot of the dais, with a bag over his head. It wasn't clear who he was, but he had dark hands. A feeling of dread washed over me. Jack, Ebo, and Kyler came into the office. They took seats in the room. I leaned against the front of my desk. What do you think this is about? Asked Jack. I was about to say something when Ebo said, Fuck me, that's a black man in the chair. Does that mean... Jack said. I don't know, I said, but these are new harmonists. We know what they're capable of. Everyone nodded. I pressed play. There was a sound of a gavel. All those who were milling around moved to the edges of the room. The center of the room and the dais lit up. There were 4 men on the dais, dressed in robes. They stepped into the light, and one man came to the front. It was UI Director Miller. I froze. Oh my gods? I whispered. The director raised his hands, and the room silenced. Gentlemen, I have called you here as I believe that our plans may have been compromised. He stepped down to the floor and shoved the man off the chair. I caught this pleb going through my office and trying to download files from my computer. There's an angry murmur in the crowd. Just goes to show you how inferior his kind are. As we have new brothers who should learn how to deal with plebs, we will have them met out justice for this pleb's insolence. Come out, brothers. 5 men dressed in black came through the side door, each one carrying a black scourge. They stopped in the middle of the room where the light was brightest. They were all white men, mostly blonde. The director looked at them with approval. My brothers, this pleb was caught trying to learn our secrets. He must be dealt with. And to prove your loyalty to our cause, you will be the ones to carry out that punishment. Yes, sir, they chorused. Priest of recruits, prepare the room. One of the other men on the dais came down to the floor and motioned to some of the other men. 2 of them grabbed the hooded man off the floor and dragged him into the light. The recruits circled around the hooded man. Proceed, commanded Miller from the dais. The recruits closed in on the hooded man and started beating him with the scourges, which I could see were knotted at the ends, and with their bare hands. Jesus, said Jack, they're going to kill him. Jack wasn't wrong. They went after the hooded man as if somehow he had done something wrong to them. The men on the sidelines were cheering them on. The hooded man tried to fight at first, but the recruits overwhelmed him. After about 10 minutes, the gavel sounded again. The recruit stepped back. The hooded man was lying on the floor, a bloody mess, with his face to the floor. In the middle of the beating, the hood had come off. Miller was handed something from one of the other priests on the dais, and he walked to where the recruits were standing around the man. One of the other priests on the dais raised a hand, and a large hook came down from the ceiling. As our forefathers did in the ancient times on earth, to those who tried to fight and wouldn't stay in their place, we now condemn this man to death. Brother Adrian, if you will. Miller handed one of the recruits what he had carried down from the dais, which was a rope with a noose on the end. Brother Adrian tied it to the hook on the ceiling as the other recruits lifted the man from the floor. His face came into the light, and even through the blood I knew who it was. No, I whispered, and fell to my knees, just as I heard Jack say, "Oh, fuck." The world became just the scene on the screen. Again, I thought. It's happening again. No, Adrian, don't do this. I was your friend long before you met these assholes. Adrian slapped him. Fuck you, bastard. All you did was hold me back. Adrian spit on him and then put the noose over Malcolm's neck. In the name of the Prophet Owen and the loyal sons, I condemn you to death. Adrian raised his arm and the hook began to rise again. The men started to sing. Onward, Christian soldiers. Adrian, no, stop this. Malcolm pleaded as long as he could, but then his voice became strangled and he stopped moving with one last shudder. The world went gray. No! I yelled. I heard Jack yelling something to someone and the feed turned off. Marcia! I want their heads, I whispered. What? They asked. I looked up at Jack, Kyler, and Ebo standing around me. I want their heads! I want Miller's head! I screamed. I want their fucking heads! I started towards the door, but Jack grabbed me and held me back. I tried to fight him, but he just held on. The world seemed to shrink around me. Then I heard someone scream, and it took a minute to realize it was me. At some point, Jack brought me to my room. Like a good friend, he stayed with me, but all his presence did was grate on my nerves. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to think. I just needed to be alone. "Jack," I said, "thank you for staying with me, but I need some time alone." "You sure?" he said. "I don't mind staying." "Hell, you did it for me on station." "Yes," I said, which came out sounding more irritated than I wanted it to. "Yes," I said again, gently. "I'll be okay. I just need some time, okay?" He looked at me with a searching look, and I didn't really have to guess what he was looking for. Jack sighed, then stood. "Okay, Marcia. Call me if you need me." He squeezed my shoulder as he walked past the couch, then left. As the door closed, I sat on the couch. Fucking hell, I thought. I stood up, and my body seemed to automatically make its way to the printer. I scrolled through the options, made a selection, and watched as a glass and bottle appeared. Part of my brain was saying, "What the fuck are you doing? You know where this leads." But the rest of me didn't care. I was sick of caring. I went back to the couch, put the bottle and glass carefully on the coffee table, poured out a measure, and pulled back my arms as if I had been burned. The movements were so automatic that it shocked me. I stared at the amber liquid and finally realized that I had chosen rum. "Shit," I said. The glass and bottle seemed to almost become living things, calling to me with the promise of oblivion, of a night free of nightmares and the feeling that I had to fix everything that was wrong with the galaxy. The rational psychologist part of my brain was aware that that wasn't really going to happen, but the rest of me just wanted to let go of that hard-edged control. I didn't want the responsibility anymore, or at least not for a few hours. That seemed to decide it for me. I was so tired. I just wanted a way out, even if it didn't last. I picked up the glass, surprised that my hands were as steady as they were, and downed the amber liquid. The familiar taste recalled memories that I'd rather forget, so I put more in the glass and drank it. "This wasn't the deal we had, granddaughter," said Papa Legba after the third glass. "While I appreciate the rum, you know where this path leads." "So what? You've already shown me my death. I die alone in the dark. Who's going to care if I die and what I really am? A fucking drunk." I poured it forth. There was a rustling in front of me. I looked up from my glass to see Papa Legba sitting across from me, his hands resting on his knees and his eyes full of love I didn't want to see. I lifted the glass to him and downed it. He frowned. The rational part of me recoiled. The part of me that was starting to feel the buzz coming on didn't care what he thought. "Be careful, child. You ain't used to the hard stuff anymore," he said. "Why do you care?" I asked, and poured another. His face became stormy. "I care, child, because as I said, this wasn't our agreement. You signed a contract with me. I help you stay sober. In return, you help people and make offerings to me. This here is what you signed up for, darling." Well, what if I'm tired of it, huh? Why does all this have to fall on me, huh? "Marcia, go find out what's wrong. Marcia, take down a fucking government with a fucking crossbow. Marcia, reassure people who are going to rot and die that things will be just fucking fine. Marcia, go rat out these assholes who want to destroy humanity. You've done it before, so you should be good at it by now. Marcia, watch your brother get hanged and do nothing because you have to think of everyone else who fucking don't give a shit that your brother just got lynched." I stared him in the eye, tears streaming down my face. I took another drink, then said, "Why me, huh? Why does responsibility for cleaning up the universe's shit fall on me? I'm nothing. I'm no god or guru or saint." "You are what you are, child. You agreed to work for me. Don't blame me for being good at it." I picked up the glass and hurled it at the apparition in the chair. "Fuck being good at it!" I yelled, as the glass made a satisfying smash against the wall behind him. He didn't move or even flinch. Suddenly, I felt very, very small. I put my head in my hands. I'm tired of the people I love dying around me, Papa, I said in a whisper. His hand touched my shoulder. People are always dying, child. You can't help that. You want to stop more people from dying? You gotta do what you do and put the evil bastards in their place. I never promised you this'd be easy, and I never promised that people you love wouldn't die. You can yell at me all you want, but nothing's gonna change the fact that you're the one who's here and has the power to do what has to be done. She's the one who sent you here, and if she didn't think you could do it, she would have sent someone else. She should have, I said, looking at the bottle on the table with shame. No, child, you are the right person at the right time, he said. Then the hand left my shoulder. I looked up, and Papa was gone. The bottle on the table was more than half empty. I was tempted to just finish it off, but shame at my failure filled me. I took the bottle and put it in the recycler instead. The world felt upside down and inside out. I turned out the lights and went to bed, curling up in a fetal position. I tried to block the rest of the universe out and cried myself to sleep. Gods, let me enact your vengeance on these men. Let me be your instrument of justice. I will bring them all down. Give me the strength to do what needs to be done. Oh, here you are. I probably should have checked here first, Jack said as he slipped into the pew next to me. I didn't look at him. I stared at the stained glass window behind the altar, which had a sun and all the religious symbols of humanity around it. It glowed warmly from the light behind it. I expected Jack to scold me for slipping out of my apartment without an escort, but I needed guidance. The gods were the only ones who could really help me now. Jack shifted. I don't need to hear it, Jack. I know there was nothing I could do. Wisely, Jack didn't reply. His presence was comforting and solid next to me, a beacon of light to my weary heart. I felt like I didn't deserve his trust or his love at this moment. He didn't know what the First had said to me before we left Survey Hub, and I hadn't been able to tell him. I thought that the First had been overreacting when they say I may have to kill them all. Now I knew they had been right. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that it had to be done. But Jack, he would try and do it for me, and I can't have him do that. I can't have him watch me do it. I started praying again. Gods, please hear me. Give me the courage and strength to do what needs to be done. Marinette, Papa, Morgan, Hecate, all deities of vengeance, hear my prayer. The light in the chapel seemed to grow. I turned to see Jack's face staring at the sun and the window completely enraptured. I turned to the window, and the world was suddenly filled with a bright white light. A dark black woman with chains on her hands and feet walked up to me. Even though she was in chains, she stood tall and proud. Get up, she commanded. I did so. She walked around me, then came again to stand in front of me. Yes, you too are my instrument. Will you help your sister break my chains? My sister? My sister's dead. The goddess shook her head. You have many siblings in spirit, daughter. With all that you have learned, have you still not realized that not all families are tied by blood? She stepped to the side, and I saw Jenny in a chair, surrounded by a sigil that looked familiar. She reached out a hand to me, and I slowly reached towards her, but she turned towards Jack. The goddess stood in front of me. You are not alone, daughter. Will you be my instrument? She asked again. Yes, I said. Do you accept this task willingly? It will not be easy. Yes. She looked at Jack. He will need to leave you. Your sister will need his help. I understand, Mother. The goddess put her hand to my face. Remember, child, you have family. You have us. You are not alone. You are never alone. I nodded, and the light around me faded, making the chapel seem much darker than it really was. I got up off my knees and sat back in the pew. Marcia, I have to go, Jack said. Jenny will need me. I nodded. I know. grabbed my hand and gave it a squeeze. Will you be okay? I shook my head. No. She said I'd be in your way if I stay. I nodded. He squeezed my hand again. I love you, Marcia. I love you too, Jack. Bring her home. I will, he said and stood up. He walked to the end of the pew, then stopped when he got to the aisle. I'll be back for you, Marcia, I promise. I won't leave you alone, he said, echoing the Black Mother's words. His footsteps faded as he left the chapel. After a few minutes I followed, knowing what needed to be done. You have been listening to Tales from Flat Space. If you want to support me in my writing, there are many ways to do it. Share this podcast, follow me on my Twitch channel, or buy my books. All you have to do is go to revginapon.net and click on the relevant links. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.